A moment of silence for the fallen teams. Привет, I'm Znayu, and welcome to day 2 of the RLCS Fall Major Analysis. Just like in the last video, I'm going to give my take on all the different series, and after I do that, I'm also going to talk about the top 4 teams that I like. So the first matchup is going to be Endpoint versus Vitality. It went 3-1, and honestly, I'm confused. Like, is Vitality doing all right? I feel like they're so unlike themselves. They're not really doing that much better in this series. I genuinely think they're overthinking or something. Maybe the LAN environment is getting to them. But I did see Fairy Peak posting on Twitter that he's suffering from food poisoning. So honestly, like, I could definitely see that being a huge hindrance to the team and honestly the entire team's morale, because if you have a player that's feeling ill, it's kind of weird for the rest of your teammates to, get hyped and everything if one person can't really do it. So just because one player is feeling ill, it can kind of spread mentally to the teammates. So I think that might have a lot to do with why Vitality isn't doing so hot. Endpoint, on the other hand, they don't really have as much of an excuse. They're also not looking amazing, but they're getting a little bit better, and they're scrapping together a few goals here and there. And both of these teams looked better in this series, but I think Endpoint so far is recovering better than Vitality is. So Complexity versus Era is kind of a familiar matchup for these two teams, I'm sure, being they're originally both from South America. It went in Complexity's favor, but it looked like they both knew what the matchup entailed. Something that I actually noticed is that neither team played extremely quickly like they normally do. They were a little bit more reserved, and actually when they had possession, they were treating it more carefully. And I think that might have something to do with the fact that they're used to playing against each other and they know what to expect from one another. So they know when they're able to slow down the game and take control of the ball. I get the impression Complexity felt really at home here, and there was absolutely no surprises for them. In Furia versus G2, it really feels like the NA style that relies heavily on clean mechanics and accurate shot taking. I think it's really suffering in this LAN environment, and G2 is having a lot of problems with it. Again, it's hard to say if it's because of Dries being a rookie. He did make a few defensive errors, maybe pushing up as a third man too much. However, he's also the only one really putting up a lot of goals for the team. So it's kind of hard to knock him for being aggressive when he might be the only reason that they're even scoring at all. I'd really like to see this team get more comfortable, but who knows how the LAN environment affects a team. And maybe the old veterans, Chicago and JNAPS, are feeling something themselves. I don't know. I thought that G2 had a little bit more success when they relied less on their mechanics and more on their unorthodox passing plays like they normally had with Rizzo. Some of that actually came out, and I think that can be really good if they continue on using that sort of thing. On the other hand, Furia, I think, with their aggression, were able to disable G2's mechanical usage. So anytime they got the ball, it was slapped away by Furia, and maybe that's why their mechanics really weren't showing as well as they could. In Ground Zero versus Tokyo Verdy, it's very simply a 3-0. Tokyo is completely outmatched by every team here, and props to them to get to this level. But I think they're going to need a split or two to actually catch up to the rest of the teams and the rest of the regions. But I'm happy to see them here. And Ground Zero did well. They didn't have any trouble dismantling them. So they're in a good place right now. Even though it kind of seems like they got a little bit of a free match. To be honest, at this level, no match is totally free. So that concludes the round 2 series. Now, moving on to round 3. Dignitas versus SMPR really impressed me in both how good both teams played and actually how good SMPR was. I actually didn't know that they were this good. I'm sad to admit. Dignitas, of course, played exactly as I expected, but even though it was a 3-0 sweep, SMPR was fighting every single game, and I think that they were pretty close. I think SMPR might actually make it into the top 8 fairly comfortably, and maybe even the semifinals. They're playing really well. And something I didn't know about SMPR's path to the top 8 is that they had the exact same teams that G2 did, and they're 2-0 rather than compared to G2, which is 0-2. Really goes to show how good SMPR is compared to G2 and how poorly G2 is acclimating to the LAN environment. Also, something interesting is I actually didn't know, as Gregan said, that apparently Jack is the coach and the captain of this squad. So that's why they don't really have a coach anymore. And they're doing just fine. They seem to have a very structured style. They know what they're doing, and I think that has a lot to do with it. In Renegades versus Ground Zero really showed their dominance on their Oceanic counterpart. And I think it has to do with the fact that they have played each other that much. Something that I've noticed this event is that a lot of the teams from the same regions are having fairly consistent results against each other, just like they normally would back home. So that leads me to believe that the LAN environment is affecting pretty much everyone somewhat equally. There's a few teams like Dignitas and FaZe that are standing out right now, but for the most part, everyone is getting the nerves just as equally as one another. Maybe it's because this is everybody's first LAN in a long time. FaZe versus BDS was going to be exciting no matter who FaZe faced, just because FaZe is the last NA team that is really doing well, maybe besides Complexity, depending on who you ask, if they're considered NA or SAM. But in this case, FaZe did not disappoint. They completely destroyed BDS, and even though it's 3-1, BDS didn't look like they were comfortable even for a moment. I felt like there was so much aggression and so much pressure that First Killer put on the defense of BDS, and all the while, even if he didn't score, even if the whole squad didn't score, they just rotated, stole boost, and continued the onslaught. BDS could not catch a breath. It was ridiculous, and I am really excited to see how FaZe plays. I think that they're making it to the finals of this event. It's going to be really exciting. NRG versus Endpoint kind of showed some hope that both of these teams are improving a little bit as the event goes on, but it's not that drastic. I think specifically Justin and Garrett were starting to really wake up and find their own, but it wasn't fast enough and it wasn't significant enough. Endpoint still were a little bit more consistent and took the W today, but I'm a little worried for both of these teams. It'll be interesting to see tomorrow what happens to them. In Vitality versus Era, Vitality has been steadily improving in this event, but it's not that significant, and they should be beating Era far more dominantly than they did. It really felt like they barely won, but again, it might have to do with, I think it actually has a lot to do with the fact that Fairy Peak is feeling ill, and honestly, when someone's ill, it's always a downer, so it's really hard. While normally back at home, Complexity versus Envy would have Envy being the favorite to win, I actually think at this event that Complexity was the favorite, and it was their series to lose. Envy is struggling to adjust to the LAN environment, and honestly, I think Complexity is having a lot better time because possibly moving over to the States from their home countries was in itself a very drastic change, and they've gotten used to moving locations. So this move to Sweden to play their series might not be as drastic of a difference for them compared to any other team. They looked much more dominant than Envy, and I'm excited to see how Complexity looks because I think that they're actually going to make the top 8. Well, Tokyo should be happy that they made LAN, but I don't know. G2 should be feeling lucky that they played Tokyo. They shouldn't feel good about their performance, but there's still hope yet for the team. I wish them luck, honestly, because I really want to see this team succeed, and I know they've played very well recently online, so let's see it happen. Maybe the more Chicago busts out the Santa hat, the better they're going to play. I don't know. Props to Tokyo, and good luck to G2. Oh, geez. In Sandrock versus Furia, I honestly could not tell what was going on because it was either a complete one-sided match coming out of Sandrock against Furia, and then in game 2, they were down what was it, like 4 or 5 or 6 or something, and then they started coming back. I don't remember exactly how many goals were scored, but all I know is there was at least 10 goals scored in that game alone. And then in game 3, it was a very dominant performance from Furia against Sandrock. But then in game 4, they went back and Sandrock took them out. Like I don't really know what was happening there. It looked like both teams were extremely aggressive, and whichever team kind of figured out how to out-aggress the other, they just completely dominated the other. So I loved how Sandrock was playing, and the fact that they did that to Furia tells me a lot about one of my favorite teams. So I think that there's going to be a lot going on in the top 8 with some of these teams that aren't necessarily from EU or NA. We might be surprised. And as far as my top 4 and what teams I really like how they play, not necessarily by the results, it's still, just like in the last video, it's still going to be Dignitas, FaZe, Sandrock, and Complexity in that order. What's interesting to me is the fact that they, I think, played even better today than they did yesterday. So looks like my favorite play style, which is typically more leaning towards aggressive play, is doing really well this tournament. And it might be that a lot of these teams are having an easier time translate their online play to tournament play. I think that these teams might have a very good time playing just because they have a lot of individualistic 1v1 skill while also using team play. But more than anything, because they're aggressive, they don't have to rely so much on reacting to their opponents. Because on LAN, perhaps, I don't know, but maybe it's harder to react. People are a little bit more nervous, and so the nerves are slowing you down or making you panic. I don't know, but I love that these teams are doing good. And so thanks for watching. Make sure you guys subscribe. And if you guys have anything that you'd like me to analyze, even besides this major in Rocket League or in gaming, feel free to write in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. So thank you.